You've reached Hotel Pacifico, your 5-star destination for BC politicos. Press 4 for room service. Press the star key for your hosts Mike McDonald and Kate Hammer.
Welcome back, guests. Hi, Geoff.
Good morning, Mike. How are you?
I'm never better. Good to see you again this week. A lot of outpouring of and remembrances for John Horgan last week since we recorded. Nice to see.
Yeah, very nice to see. And I haven't heard any specifics at all about a planned celebration of his life, but I imagine the family's going to need a very big venue given how many people have posted selfies of him and all that kind of thing with him and all the tributes they're pouring out. So I think it'll be a very big affair and a very interesting one, but I don't know when or where. So we'll certainly pass that news along when we hear it.
Yeah, well, I'm sure the family's overwhelmed with well-wishers who are reaching out. Well, today, big week in government this week with the appointment of a new cabinet in Victoria. And we're going to dig deep into that today with our guest and in the strategy suite as well. Our guest today, again, is Don Wright. No stranger to Hotel Pacifico, and now his third stay and first back-to-back guest. Some might call him the Steve Martin of Hotel Pacifico. He's been on this show so many times that we're going to have to keep track. James Moore might be right there with him, but we'll have to go back and count. But we're going to have the conversation with Don this week that we meant to have last week.
Yeah, he turned on a dime with us after we got the news of John Horgan's passing too.
Don pivoted to share his remembrances last week. So if you haven't checked out that episode, please do. But just to bring all of our guests up to date, Don is the former head of the BC Public Service, longtime deputy minister, business leader, someone who likes to share his thoughts through well-researched op-eds and articles. We asked Don here today to talk about BC government's new cabinet structure and challenges it will be facing in the coming year. Don, welcome back.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Well, you obviously don't have much on your plate to be able to do 2 podcasts in 2 weeks, so times are tough.
That's not a very gracious welcome, Mike. I just have to step in there.
So much for these
Thanks
busy
for making
retirements.
Time in your busy calendar, Don.
Thank goodness they called me, Well, no, I know you're a man on the move. Thank you very much. How was Tofino? You were up there last week when we reached out to you.
It was great. It was great. It's just a beautiful part of BC, and that tide coming in and these people in their wetsuit surfing, I was kind of envious of them, but not envious enough to actually give it a try myself.
No, didn't don the wetsuit and get out there?
No.
No. I go up to Tofino fairly regularly, and I actually do have a wetsuit. So that's just a warning to anybody who's on Chesterman Beach to avert your eyes. Avert your eyes. Well, this week, Premier Eby unveiled the new look cabinet. 23 ministries, I believe it is. 4 ministers of state. Lots and lots of deputy ministers and associate deputy ministers supporting their work. Noteworthy is that there wasn't a mandate letter yet tailored to each minister. We have to wait until January for that. What was your hot take, Don, when you absorbed the reorganization of government?
Well, a few things. First of all, I was surprised at how large the cabinet was. Now, maybe I was just listening to you guys too much because last week you were speculating that he should start out with a small cabinet and leave himself some room to grow. But I was surprised by that. And the other thing that I wouldn't say I'm surprised at, there's always going to be some restructuring when a government starts out new or there's a midterm shuffle or whatever. But the 2 things that I scratch my head about is one is the new infrastructure ministry. And I understand the rationale for it. But my experience is whenever you take parts of ministries out and put them into new ministries, you lose a lot of time in trying to just get things functional again. So I'd be a little bit concerned whether that will happen as quickly as they hope it will. And then the other one that I understand is putting municipal affairs in with housing, because it's all about trying to work with the municipalities to up their densification and relax their zoning and all that stuff. But then, the head scratcher was there's a parliamentary secretary for local government, and that's reporting to the premier. So I just don't know what to make of that, quite frankly. So
But they also moved responsibility for the UBCM to intergovernmental relations, which is also in the premier's office. So,
okay.
But I was scratching my head a bit about that too, because it leaves Ravi Kahlon with the bad cop job
Yeah.
of hard timing the municipalities about their failure to do this or that, probably not handing out too many laurels given the difficulties in the housing market, but none of the upside of working collectively with UBCM to maybe do things that would make them feel better. So,
yeah,
tough one for him.
Well, they will have to have some touch with him, though, because there are functions under the Municipal Act and the Municipal Affairs Ministry, are there not? That the minister, like usually there's a lineup to see the Minister of Municipal Affairs at UBCM. So,
Well, you're putting your finger on a question I still have, and maybe the mandate letters will clarify that.
Yeah. And then there are a couple other things that are worth noting. I think the move of the Climate Action Secretariat over to energy is interesting. I think it makes sense because decarbonization and the energy transition are totally interrelated, and so you might as well have one minister, one ministry trying to make sense of all of that. So I think that was worth noting as well too.
So when you have a large cabinet, so there's 27, I think maybe 28 with the premier, I can't remember the final number, which is about the size of Gordon Campbell's first cabinet when he had 77 MLAs. It's a large group. Does that create a tendency for more power or more decision making in the smaller cabinet committees, like well, I can't remember what it's called now. Is it planning and priorities or agenda priorities? Can't remember what they name it now. And Treasury Board. Is that, in your experience, something that happens where decision making kind of resides with the core group, and then the full cabinet becomes less of a deliberative body and more of a rubber stamp?
Yeah. Well, I'd like to get Geoff's take on this as well too. But my experience is it doesn't so much devolve power into the cabinet committees, although they do have their role. But it I think results in more power, at least the power to coordinate, just in the premier's office, and then there's kind of ad hoc meetings. You'll get like the three ministers that need to get their arms around a particular problem sitting down with the premier, as opposed to dealing with that in full cabinet, because when it's that large, it's just, you don't get the same frank discussions that you will get if it was smaller. But I'd be interested in Geoff's take.
Well, I think maybe for listeners who aren't as forced to be up to speed as we are on these things, I would just say, and be interested in your comments, Don and Mike, a minister of state is an honorific role. There's no direct line troops reporting to you. You don't get to do such stuff on your own. You really are kind of the first lieutenant to the minister in that case. And those relationships can be more or less positive, right?
Yeah. It really depends on the relationship with the senior minister, how much rope they want to give.
Yeah. Well, the most successful one I saw was Katrina Chen be Minister of State for Childcare under Katrine Conroy, who was very, very supportive in that. Was it education? Maybe I got the wrong minister in education.
No. It originally was in children and families.
That's right, children and families. Yeah. And they had a very good division of labor. A lot of work was done. Don put substantial and relevant resources at Katrina Chen's disposal, but they were very integrated into what the plan was to launch childcare. And now we see a Minister of State for Childcare in education, which is where the whole project was intended to land. So there can be rules for them, but there's four in this case. There's Gary Begg, now finally Solicitor General after his triumph in Surrey Guildford, but also Terry Young, a second police officer, as a Minister of State with what sounds like a public disorder kind of a mandate. So the title, but Terry Young, for whatever skills he's got, and I'm sure they're significant, is not going to be able to do much without collaborating very, very closely with Gary Begg. But he's at the cabinet table. Yeah. And then I think the other, I haven't really looked at it closely, but the Treasury Board is going to be a very difficult assignment for the cabinet members and the few MLAs that are on there. The budget process is going to be extraordinarily difficult, I think, for this government, just because of the context they're in, but also the problems that they want to solve. So that cabinet committee may be, a bigger and more important assignment than it would be in a regular period.
Don, I know we're getting into the weeds a bit on how the decisions are made, but in your experience as deputy for however long you were there, 3-4 years,
3.5, yeah,
and your prior experience, what part of that cabinet decision-making process really worked well, or did you feel like, was it all humming along when you were there, or was there a particular process that you thought was really high value?
Well, I've often only half facetiously said the role of the deputy to the premier is really air traffic control. Mm-hmm. You're trying to avoid two ministers from colliding with each other in midair. And the various committees and cabinet and ad hoc meetings are all in aid of that. I think the most effective part of the overall process when I was there was a combination of the Treasury Board process and full cabinet. And full cabinet didn't necessarily make a lot of decisions, but it gave the chance for the premier to talk them through with his colleagues, with everybody in the room, and it kind of solidified the consensus around what the government was going to do on any particular issue.
When you look at just if you could reflect too, Don, how does the head of the public service work through the transition and interregnum period? You see the platform for the first time. It's been developed in the political side. You know the realities internally. What sort of process does the head of the public service go through in trying to shape the transition binders for whatever government may arrive? You look at everybody's platform, obviously, not just the incumbent government. And maybe we could ask some follow-up questions about some of the specific issues that arose during this campaign. But do you treat election commitments as cast in stone? Do you wait for a conversation with the new premier? How does it go?
Well, I can describe the process in general. So you'll develop a format for the briefing books that each ministry has to put together. And they have to be comprehensive because they have to be written as if you've got a brand new rookie minister that's going to try to get his or her head around her new responsibilities. But you also have to daylight the big issues that the government's going to have to deal with. So there will be a kind of a standard process to get that done. And then I would expect that in this case, Shannon, she would be developing some government-wide issue briefing books that they would want them to look at in the Premier's office. In terms of the platforms, I mean, it would have been very difficult to have kind of put in place plans for all of the platform from both major parties. For the Conservatives, it would have been particularly difficult because they seem to keep adding new ones on a daily basis. But I think they would take the major ones. So, for example, the grocery rebate, or in the Conservatives' case, the Rustad rebate, or whatever they ended up calling that. And you would try to get finance to do a costing. You would look at what the machinery of government would be necessary to actually execute those. And so you'd have notes on that type of stuff ready to go.
Yes, last week we spoke about TELUS's Indigenous Communities Fund, which provides flexible $5,000 to $25,000 grants to Indigenous-led programs supporting Indigenous peoples in Canada across all provinces and territories. This week, I want to tell you about another grant recipient of this fund, located right here in BC. Positive Living North, Nokeo Tien Tiana Society aims to address root causes of HIV, AIDS, and hepatitis C risk and enhance overall well-being for people in Prince George and Smithers living with HIV or hepatitis C, creating a holistic approach to care and support. They will leverage funding to support Indigenous people at risk or living with HIV or hepatitis C with food and nutrition and a culturally safe environment. The Food Hub program, located in downtown Prince George, addresses the challenges of stigma and homelessness, promoting cultural safety and social support. And they work in close collaboration with other community organizations. In partnership with Indigenous peoples, TELUS is committed to progressing the path of reconciliation in a deeply meaningful way and is dedicated to fulfilling their role and responsibilities in this regard. For more than a decade, TELUS has collaborated with Indigenous peoples and organizations to enable connectivity and bridge digital, geographic, and socioeconomic divides. For more information about the Indigenous Communities Fund program, go to telus.com/ICF.
Your role as head of the public service, you had to appoint deputy ministers. And I'm curious how that process worked in tandem with the cabinet being selected. Because did you already know which deputies were going to go to which ministries before you knew who the cabinet was going to be? Or did you wait to see the cabinet ministers chosen and then maybe just make sure the deputy was a good fit with the cabinet minister?
It was closer to the latter, Mike, in our case. But, it's done on an iterative basis. And so, constantly having conversations with the premier and with Geoff in terms of what it looks like in terms of which people will go into the major ministries. And you are trying to pick a cadre of deputies that you think will be able to execute for the government, but you do give some thought to, okay, is there going to be an oil and water problem if Minister X gets matched with Deputy Y? But for the most part, you were picking people that were appropriate for the ministry as opposed to for the minister.
You can see a dynamic, though, with David Eby in the first term, where he had special advisors appointed directly to him who were in areas of significant importance to the government, but also that had powerful ministers working on the files. What do you do about renewal of that senior executive leadership? I mean, you're going to have an opportunity there for you as the deputy to the premier to maybe deal with some performance issues you may have observed, or someone may want to retire.
Yeah.
Or there may be a view from the incoming administration that they want to bring in some new blood. How does that discussion occur? Because, it's no secret the party rank and file often clamor for changes in the deputy ranks because I think that's a big source of power.
Yeah. Well, in my case, I was quite fortunate because John really did say, we trust you to make the right calls here. And we did, we kept a lot of the deputies that were in place, but we swapped some out that I had identified as just weren't going to be a good fit. In terms of renewal, I was fortunate that my predecessor, Kim, had developed a good pipeline of here's some ADMs that are ready to be deputy ministers. And so I was able to access that. Didn't really bring in that many people from the outside. I brought in one ADM at the start, and then around midterm, we brought in another deputy from the outside. But other than that, really worked with what was there in place. And there were a few people that the premier said, could we find that person a spot in the public service? And if I thought the fit was right, I would do that. So it's, there's no black and white. There's just a bunch of gray. But for the most part, I was lucky enough to be given the mandate to shape the public service in the way I thought would be appropriate for this government.
Mm-hmm. So looking ahead, Don, and the potential storm clouds or current storm clouds, in fact, a bomb cyclone of economic circumstances facing the province right now. We've talked ad nauseum in recent weeks about the size of the deficit and the challenge that this government is going to be facing. And now we know who some of those faces are. Brenda Bailey in finance, and relative unknown jobs minister, Diana Gibson from Oak Bay, Gordon Head. And then we've got Adrian Dix in energy, and Jagrup Brar in mining, and so on and so on. So they have to deal with economic growth. What do you see as the headwinds here? What are your primary concerns for the province right now as it heads into the next year economically?
Yeah, well, just harken back to the conversations that you two had with Kate during the campaign. A number of times you remarked that it's weird that there's been very little discussion about the fiscal situation and very little talk about the direction of the economy. And you're right, it was a little bit strange that you didn't see much of that. And as far as the fiscal, I guess because the Conservatives were promising a whole lot of stuff and the NDP were kind of in that arms race, it'd be a little bit awkward to point out that the government had a big deficit that they're going to have to wrestle with. So they're going to have to deal with that. And I don't envy Brenda Bailey, her new role. It's going to be tough. You just, if you want to preserve a positive role for government, you can't let the taxpayer debt to GDP ratio continue to rise. You've got to bring that under control. There's basically three levers. One is expenditure management. The second is revenue enhancement, and the third is economic growth. I'll take a pass on the expenditure management, except to say that I think you're going to have to do it. On revenue enhancement, I don't see a lot of room for tax increases.
In fact, they're booking a tax reduction as part of the platform.
Yeah. And the notion of, well, we'll soak the rich. I think our marginal tax rates are pretty much at the maximum level you'd want to go before you start seeing a real problem with people deciding they're going to move to Calgary, or high-priced talent saying, your job in Vancouver is interesting, but I think I'll stay in Texas. Thank you very much, or whatever. So I think there's limited room to go there. And then on the taxes that hit consumers, well, the whole election was about affordability, so you really can't go there. There's one possible source that I think they could maybe look at, and it's a type of property tax, but it's a property tax that's targeted. There's some economists at UBC, Tom Davidoff is one of them, that have done some interesting analysis that look at the income tax paid by neighborhoods in Vancouver, and the data they have found, and it's really good micro data, shows that neighborhoods where the houses may be upwards of $4 million, that the income tax paid by the median household in those neighborhoods is really quite small. And so how can they afford that house if they've got such low income? And I think part of it is these may be retired people, but I think for the most part, it's people that have offshore income that are not declaring it. And we tried to get at some of that with the speculation vacancy tax, but I think there's some more room to go there. And I've done some rough ballpark calculations, and I think there might be $1 billion or $2 billion that could be achieved there. But other than that, not much revenue enhancement. So Geoff, as a former municipal councillor, is probably getting uncomfortable and wants to weigh in here.
No, I certainly agree there's room in places like that, but I wanted to go back to the cloud attached to that silver lining, Don, which is on the part you passed over quickly, because without getting into specifics, the idea of holding the line on spending is easy to say, but very difficult to do. And I didn't realize till I was there the tremendous pressures that exist in the system. So if you're not going to cut services, for example, which is the standard position that New Democrats take, you still face the pressures of negotiated wage increases, the cost of purchasing supplies, and all of that kind of thing, which contribute to the service and to the growth of your expenditures. And with the public sector contracts all coming due in March, how do you factor in and manage the necessity to bargain with all of those public sector workers in a coming budget year? That's always been a mystery and a black box to lots of people, but they're going to come to the table. They're not going to ask for cutbacks.
Yeah.
What would you recommend on that front?
Well, I mean, you might remember some of the kind of dynamics in the 90s, Geoff. There's a combination of things that the government will want to say to the unions in that dance. Point out that the government has been pretty good for the public sector unions up until now, and that they want to maintain a positive role for government in our economy, but we need to maintain fiscal capacity to do so. And so you'll basically be saying, we can maybe see a cost of living adjustment, but there's not going to be much room for real wage increases until the economy gets better, and try to pivot the conversation to the economy. And that's the third lever the government has. And it's no kind of secret that the private sector has not been doing well in BC over the last 5 years or so, that we really haven't pulled out of the COVID trough. And I don't want to sound like I'm a mouthpiece for the Business Council or anything like that, but I did some calculations, and over the last 5 years of the net increase in employment, 80% of it has been public sector. And over the last year, it's actually more than 100% has been public sector. Smokes. Now, just to be clear, I've spent a lot of my time in the public sector, and I'm not one of these people that says public sector jobs are not useful and don't provide value to the public. But you just can't afford to have 20% of the population, in essence, paying for 80%. So that is going to have to be turned around. Mm-hmm. And there, I think the government has to actually sit down and start having some hard conversations with the business community, and try to get onto a better place. I think they need to start looking at some things on the resource industry side to try to make it easier for activity to happen. And I think just basically they need to set a more positive tone for the business community, because it's not a good tone right now from what I've been picking up from the business community.
Don, let's talk about the net contributors to the economy here. You did some research, I think, when you were in government, based on how much respective industries contribute on a per job basis to the economy, I guess. Yeah. And you found that some industries contribute a lot, and some are actually negative contributors, such as the film industry. Can you just illuminate us a bit on that, and how you came about to calculate that?
Yeah, so I asked the Ministry of Finance to try to calculate the total net government revenue that the province captured from the different sectors, and then would divide that by the employment in those sectors to come up with a notion of revenue per job. Not surprisingly, the numbers were relatively high in the resource sectors, mm-hmm. Mining, oil and gas, and forestry. And for two reasons. One is they pay stumpage revenues or royalties. And so that goes into the government's coffer, but also they tend to pay relatively high wages. And so the government gets a lot in personal income tax and sales tax that get generated by them. And even, there's some talk about, well, you're providing subsidies to this sector or that sector. We netted those out. So those were the high
So even there's a lot of conversation about fossil fuel subsidies and ending subsidies to fossil fuels. Even with that, you found that natural gas jobs were like I think, one of the top, right?
Yeah. And then other sectors, not as much. The tech sector, first of all, it's hard to define the tech sector, but to the extent that we could define it properly, it's kind of a medium generator of revenue per job. And then some sectors are not so kind to the government. Tourism doesn't do that well, not because it gets a lot of subsidies, but because the average wages in that sector aren't that high. And then film, it's an interesting sector that everybody likes, but the government subsidies that we provide to compete in this arms race with all of the other state and provincial governments around the continent that are chasing the same industry, you end up actually on a net basis. Every job you have in that sector actually costs you money. So, and then I looked at the spending, and this was all done just before I left. And at that point in time, I calculated the government spent about $22,000 per employee in the government, in the province, I'm sorry. And so basically I said, if you're making more than $22,000 in a sector, then the government's getting a profit from that sector. And if you're getting below that, you're affecting a loss. And it's not that you expect every sector to pay for itself in that sense, but you do have to have enough employment and activity in those sectors that pay or net the government significantly above average revenue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is a crossroads for the government going forward, is that they're in a fiscal crunch, sluggish economic growth results, or even negative economic growth perhaps, and the opportunity in front of them is natural resources, one of them anyways, big one. And they've got to square that with climate policy and environmental policy and First Nations and all that to make that happen. And I think there's a lot of uncertainty over how they're going to approach that. I don't doubt that they want to see economic growth, but how they can actually realize the economic growth is a big question mark.
Yeah, no, there is a lot of uncertainty about how they're going to do that. I do a little part-time advising the various industrial sectors, and they're all kind of wanting to know what the direction this government is going to take. And we're just going to have to wait and see. I had expected that the NDP would win a larger majority than they did. I think most people expected that. And now it's going to be a real tricky balancing act for David Eby. How does he keep his own coalition together and possibly have to count on the Greens to vote for legislation from time to time? At the same time, he tries to take the steps that are going to get the economy, going upwards again. And I guess I should, before I sound too pessimistic, the BC economy is still growing. It's grown over the last year and actually has grown relative to other provinces pretty well. It's just that a lot of that activity has been, as I said, public sector activity that can't grow disproportionately forever.
What would you advise in certain areas? I mean, you've got a lot of background in forestry. So during the campaign, right after the campaign, Trump got elected. He's promising much larger tariffs. There was the umpteenth setback on softwood lumber tariffs. So there's external factors really hammering the forest sector as well as the internal problems.
Yeah.
What, is there 3 or 4 bullets that you would give new Forest Minister Ravi Parmar to bear down on that might start to change the morale in the sector?
Yeah, there's a few. I think he needs to work towards real certainty in terms of what the fiber supply is, because right now we have a paper AAC in terms of how much can be cut on an annual basis, but they haven't been able to get the permits to cut that. So I think they need to sit down and say, okay, here's what we really think we can commit to on a long-term basis. And I think that's going to require some conversations with First Nations, as well as maybe reviewing some of the decisions they made on deferments for old growth and that type of stuff. But once you lock in and say, look, we think we can have 42 million meters a year on an annual basis, then you at least give industry the information to which they can rationalize around. Well, if they have to shut down some more mills, they'll shut down some more mills. But you get it right sized so that you're not just desperately trying to keep the mills standing. So I think that's part of it. The second part of it is some of the stuff that we were trying to do in that first term, and I think they continued on in their second term, which is diversifying what we do with the output of the lumber mills. So things like mass timber and that type of stuff, I think, can be quite useful. And continue to try to go to markets other than the U.S. as much as possible. So I think you need to do all of that. And then the final thing is, I think you need to aggressively lobby the federal government to try to get a deal on the softwood lumber file. It's going to be difficult with Mr. Trump, no doubt about it. But my sense is the federal government hasn't been trying. That whole, when Biden was in power, it should have been something that they could have pushed for, because there was alignment in philosophy between the Trudeau government and the Biden government. Biden isn't as beholden to the southern lumber producers as Donald Trump might have been, but they just didn't do anything. And that's unlike any other previous round of the softwood lumber file. The federal government has always been very engaged and has done everything possible to get a deal so that that cloud can be lifted.
Mm-hmm.
Don, you've written in the past about, quote unquote, Canada needs a non-delusional immigration policy. And you wrote that before the election of Donald Trump as well. So giving you an opportunity to update your thinking here. First of all, starting with your concern about immigration policy, as I understand it, you just believe Canada's immigration numbers have been way too high and have had an impact on our housing market, and other downstream impacts have been harmful. I'll let you run with that.
Yeah. So start off with the obligatory. I think that immigration is an important part of what Canada is. And until a few years ago, I think there was a broad consensus in Canada to support bringing in a fairly high number of immigrants every year. And we were actually proud the way we were able to integrate that and maintain a positive social cohesion around it. But where I've been coming from, and Geoff can tell you that I was a bit of a nag from the early days in 2017 on this issue.
Prescient nag.
But I start off with a fundamental tenet that the pathway to the good society runs through the prosperity and optimism of the broad middle class. And despite lip service paid by the federal government to that notion, I see very little evidence they've really taken it to heart. And in particular, when it comes to what makes for a prosperous middle class, most of the middle class gets most of their income from the employment market. And their single biggest expense is housing. And then you just do some basic economics 101, supply and demand. If you dramatically increase the number of immigrants you're bringing in every year, that's going to increase the supply of workers and it's going to suppress wages. So that's not good for standard of living. And then same thing on the housing side. If you're bringing in significantly more new Canadians every year, there's more demand for housing, and that can't do anything but make the housing situation worse. And just to put this in perspective, prior to 2015, the number of new immigrants in Canada was in the neighborhood of 250,000. In the last 5 years, the average has been in excess of 600,000. And in fact, in the last year, it's been 1.3 million. Well,
1.3 million in the last year?
Yes. Yeah. Now, that's the most recent data was, I think, as of July 1st of this year. But you just
like a 5-time increase?
Yes. Yeah.
Folks, I want to talk to you about energy and how we use it today in BC, whether it's heating and lighting our homes, moving people and goods, or supporting industrial growth. Energy underpins almost every aspect of our lives and economy in British Columbia. Now, to illustrate this point, we have a skill testing question for our guests here at Hotel Pacifico. The question is this: how much of the energy used in BC comes from electricity? Is it A, 99%, B, 44%, or C, 17%? Take a moment. Take your time. The answer? 17%, according to Canada's energy regulator. And where does the rest of it come from? Well, a further 30% comes from the gas system. As both an electric and gas utility, our sponsor, FortisBC, understands how both of these energy systems work together to meet our province's energy needs. And in the coming weeks, I'll be talking to you more about the steps FortisBC is taking to make sure our energy in BC remains safe, reliable, and affordable. FortisBC, energy for a better BC and a better podcast. So, Don, now with the election of Donald Trump, what impact do you think that will have on our immigration policy? There's been a lot of conversation that it may drive those without immigration status in the U.S. to come try and jump across the Canadian border. What do you see playing out?
Yeah, well, I think that's a very real concern because if Trump is serious about deporting massive amounts of people as opposed to being more surgical and just focusing on people with criminal records or whatever, it's just natural to assume that those people are not going to want to be sent back to where they came from. And so I think we'll see a lot of people showing up at the Canadian-US border. And boy, that's going to be a difficult situation for the government to manage. It's just, it's awful politics all around.
We've had a little bit of it back east, but I think Canadians are totally unprepared for that in any large quantities, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But to look at it closer to home, Don, at another area that's close to your heart, we already see the post-secondary education laying off people because revenue from foreign students is cratering thanks to the changes in federal policy. Yeah. We need the post-secondary education to be strong to train our folks for the future jobs. Yeah. What kind of prescriptions would you offer an incoming minister like Ann Kang? She's been there already, but she's got a world of difficulties on her hands, doesn't she?
Yeah, she does. She does. It's going to be a real challenge. My recommendations would be to, and I'm sure they've done this in the ministry already, but do an analysis of, which schools have been taking how many international students, matching that up against effectively the quota that the Canadian government has provided them with, and then do the difficult surgery. Like I wouldn't recommend just an across the board X%. I think you want to be more nuanced than that. There are some schools that maybe, when I was doing the first round of the funding review, when I talked to the public colleges, institutes, and universities around the province, some of them acknowledged that they'd actually gotten too carried away, that there was more international students than their community could actually absorb. And so they were going to start, just gradually ratcheting back. So I think you need to do that. And then I think you have to have a hard look at the privates versus the publics. I don't think the situation in BC was nearly as bad as it was down in Ontario, where the federal minister talked about puppy mills. I wouldn't use that word, but basically you had privates that were not in the business of educating. They were basically selling work permits.
Yeah.
And if we've got private institutions doing that, that's where I would take my first cut at reducing numbers.
Right.
But it's a real big challenge because, as we said, the government doesn't have a bunch of money to shower on the institutions to make up for the lost revenue from international students. But we do have to live within the constraints
Well, and
that
as
the
Mike
federal
had,
government's going to impose. Yeah.
But we can't assume either that these folks who came here in good faith are simply going to say, "Oh, sorry about that," and head home. They probably will go into the underground economy, which has its own set of issues.
Yeah. Oh no, absolutely. I think Canada has a real honor of the crown issue, if you will. These people were sold, perhaps oversold. Come to Canada, study, then you'll get a work permit afterwards, and that will be a path to permanent residence. And I think the federal government in particular has to do some hard thinking about that. And I think to some extent, it's going to have to be kind of empathetic in terms of, well, if we could dial back the clock, maybe, person X who went to institution Y isn't really somebody who would prioritize to become a permanent resident, but we let him believe that he could, and so we're going to have to find a way to grant them permanent resident status. Yeah. Because I think the last thing you want is a bunch of people that stay in the country but aren't here with on a legal basis. So they become vulnerable to exploitation by unscrupulous employers and all kinds of other problems.
Well, we'll study the mandate letter to see if any of that's there.
when that mandate letter comes.
Is that a problem that the mandate letters are not coming until January?
Well, I don't think it's a big problem because I think most of the ministries will say, Minister, here's the stuff you need to get your mind around. And it's basically that education of the minister stage in any case. But what I'm more concerned about is when I say I'm concerned, I don't have any right to be concerned. But the reason that I've heard is they're supposedly negotiating with the Green Party. Mm-hmm. And the
Premier has said so, in fact.
Yeah. And I think that is a tactical mistake. I think he got his majority. It's razor thin, but he has to govern as if he's got a majority, and he doesn't have to, be deliberately provocative and bring forward things the Greens are going to, have to oppose. But I think he needs to present his program, present the budget. And I don't believe the Green Party is going to defeat this government in the near term anyways. They're not going to want to go to an election right away. So,
So said Joe Clark in 1979.
I'm Hamas, and this is Simon, and we live in Surrey. We started hosting on Airbnb because we thought we had the spare room, and why not share it with people? When our guests come in, first thing usually they ask is, I'm really hungry, it's been a really long flight, can you recommend a place? Usually Simon is really good with that. He knows all the good spaces. Because we got a lot of good reviews and people commented on the overall look of the space, I was like, okay, maybe I can do this for a living.
it actually gave me the courage to start school in interior design. It made such an impact on us financially, and I don't know, I think we're happier because we started Airbnb for sure.
Learn more at airbnb.com/host.
So, Don, one more dollars and cents question before you slip away on us here. Yeah. I want to go back to your comments you made at the outset about the infrastructure ministry and that it's difficult to take something out of one ministry and start it anew. And so that's part of it. But there's also I would assume that setting up that ministry, there's an expectation they're going to try and get to a better place on capital planning and execution, because in the last week we've seen the Richmond Hospital is now $1 billion. I didn't even know it was going to cost $1 billion, but now it's $1 billion overrun. Surrey Langley SkyTrain overrun. We know all the other examples, under municipal jurisdiction. What would you do to deal with these huge overruns?
Just a quick question before
you
hit
the road. Just a quick question. Save us about $10 billion. That would be great.
Well, I should be transparent about a minor conflict of interest, because I am still a shareholder in my family's construction company. Most of their work is done in Alberta and Saskatchewan, but they do some work in BC. So, and just so that people know that. But I think there's a few things they need to do. One is that they actually have to do a more tough-minded job of seeing what the capacity of the construction industry is to build all of these projects. And what I'm hearing is there's just way more projects out there than there is capacity currently in the industry. And so you'll have circumstances where you'll have maybe one or two bidders on a project. Well, that's a recipe for the government paying a lot more for that project than they would expect to. So I think they need to do that. And then I think they need to get better control on the ownership of the design of projects. So I'll give you my pet peeve. Schools in the K-12 system. We, because of the local politics and everything, we basically say, school board X, you have the mandate to build a new school in your city. And so here's the approval, and here's the budget. Let's say it's $20 million for an elementary school. Then what those school boards tend to do is they go out and they talk to the community and they say, what would you like in this school? And people say, well, wouldn't it be great if we had a room where we could do this? And wouldn't it be great if, it was wired so that, everybody could have a computer at their desk? And we like the art, so we want to have a really nice theater. And then they come back and the budget or the estimated cost is $40 million. And it puts the provincial government in an awful position. Now they have to be the bad cop that goes in and says, no, you can't have your theater in that school. So I think there needs to be an approach that is much more, this is what the province can afford to fund. This is the type of school that they can afford to fund. And, maybe look at what some other provinces have done, where they will, look at a P3 approach, where the proponents are responsible for meeting the specs for schools. And it's up to them to figure out the design that delivers that. And you can bundle, a dozen schools and you can put it out, and there'll be lots of interest in the construction industry bidding on those jobs. So those are the types of things they need to look at.
That was very successful in Saskatchewan, because one construction company then gets to do 3 or 4 different schools to the similar standard, but the school board's not sitting there adding in frills or
Yeah.
changing this or that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, finally, Don, before you leave, I just want to give you a chance to give an update on your work with ALS, Action Canada, and I know there's been some exciting developments this year in terms of the partnership with the NHL.
Yeah.
But I just want to give you a plug for that.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. And so I'll try to be as brief as possible, but we're really excited about this partnership with the NHL, and we've got two big events coming up. So on December 5th, we're going to have a online concert. Jim Cuddy, some of you may know, is going to be Blue Rodeo. It's going to be performing, and we're going to have Don McLean, who's going to be doing doing the commentary, and so the concert's free. The only price that you have to pay is listening to us asking you to consider donating to ALS Action Canada. And then in February, we have every NHL team, not just the Canadian teams, but every NHL team donating merchandise of some kind or another, and we're going to have an online auction for it. And some of this stuff is pretty cool, like the Buffalo Sabres, I think it is, have donated a box at one of their games. And, they'll not just give you the box, but they'll let you go and meet the players, maybe even skate with them on ice pregame, that type of stuff. So we're really excited about that. And we think we're going to generate a lot of money to do some really incredibly important stuff, because it is such a cruel disease, as you know, Mike, personally. And we just need to really pursue possible solutions, drug therapies, whatever, that might bring some hope to the people that get this devastating diagnosis. So thanks for giving me the opportunity.
Yeah, and I just want to acknowledge someone who made a big impact on the issue, who passed away a couple of years ago, Greg Gow, who was an incredible advocate for ALS while he was suffering with that disease. He was a legislative intern at the legislature back in the early 90s, I think, or mid 90s, and had a great career as a lawyer, and then was struck down by ALS. But he didn't go quietly. He was a just tireless advocate and real example to people, which I think helped inspire your involvement, certainly inspired mine too.
Yeah.
And I just want to recognize the contributions he made. Well, Don, thanks for stopping by again to Hotel Pacifico. I'm sure we'll have you for a fourth time in due course.
But not next week.
Not next week. No, God, no. God, no.
Yeah.
But keep writing those spicy articles that we can quote back to you in these when we have these talks.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thanks for the invitation. I enjoyed it.
Hello. You've reached the Hotel Pacifico Strategy Suite.
Welcome back, guests. And folks, out of Africa, Kate Hammer is back. We're reunited here in the Strategy Suite.
Yeah. Body
Hi,
out of
Kate.
Africa, time zone still there. Hi.
Kate, I
Good
have
to
a
be
friend
back.
who wanted us to welcome you back here.
Oh boy. Yeah,
There
I
he
knew
is.
it.
There.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yay, Kate's back! Yay!
Look at that. The cactus very happy.
I feel really
Now,
welcome.
now
Yeah.
Geoff confessed to me that he doesn't understand the cactus, but I believe our
it's a
listeners
signifier
do.
of something that I don't.
I
not-
get a lot of feedback on the cactus.
It's
so-
Geoff, it's Mike justifying an impulse buy at the peony. Like that's all
Okay,
that's all we
yeah.
need from it.
but it talks. It's a
It
talking
talks,
cactus.
yeah. Well,
Yeah,
and
that
I think
cactus
It's excellent.
got a lot of
Yeah.
airtime during the election. That cactus.
it did. It's our election cactus. It's true. It was sort of we needed levity, and the
Mhm.
cactus provided.
Mhm.
The cactus provided.
Well,
It's good to
welcome
be
back, Kate.
back.
Welcome
Thank
back.
you. Thank you.
I won't-
What did I miss?
Well, I wanted to wish you both a happy Douglas Day.
Okay. What's
Yeah,
that? No, I don't
That,
know.
wa- that was yesterday. Douglas Day, as proclaimed by the BC legislature, and the Douglas Day Act proclaims November 19th every year as Douglas Day to
Ah.
commemorate
Hmm.
the proclamation of the colony of British Columbia in 1858. So you didn't celebrate that while you were flying back?
No, wasn't
No.
highlighted.
Okay.
Wasn't highlighted.
No.
Well, I invite you to learn about the history of this great province. Dr. Daniel Marshall will appreciate that I have brought up this historical
That you
point.
mentioned this day. Okay.
So there you go.
There you
A
go.
little
Yeah.
plug to
Hats off,
our,
Daniel
our
Marshall. Yeah.
Dr.
Our
Daniel Marshall.
decolonization process continues apace. right?
Well, I think
Yeah.
it's always an opportunity to reflect on our history, the good and the bad, Jeff.
No,
Um,
I'm all for it.
Okay, and we all survived the bomb cyclone. While you were gone, Kate, Jeff and I have been very busy on the speaker circuit. We did a little dog and pony show at Lambda Alpha International, which is an urban land economics
Very
group.
cool.
Very, very
Sorry,
nice
I
evening.
missed that. Yeah.
Completely
Yeah.
Chatham
off the
House
record.
rules, but
Can't
Jeff
tell you a
and
word
I
about it. Yeah.
we're on
Yeah.
our feet for over an hour. Us old guys were up there, singing for our supper. So
Mhm.
Good questions.
pretty good, yeah. Very
Yeah.
vigorous debate. Some wizened old mayors were in the crowd there.
Oh, I
so-
love that. Yeah.
And Jeff, you just did one this week. You said over 1,000 people, and there was
Yeah, I was
they had
pinch hitting with Mary Polak, a guest on the
Mm.
pod in the past, and Stephen Smart, who was a colleague of yours, Mike, I think.
Yes,
We were
yeah.
pinch hitting a panel for Housing Central, which is the huge nonprofit housing conference that happens every year, and it was enormous. About 1,100 people, I think, at the Wall Center.
And all they wanted to talk to you about was Hotel Pacifico.
A lot of people want to talk about Hotel Pacifico, but many are hanging on every word or crumb of information they can get out of Victoria about the future of housing policy, as we all,
Well, that too.
are.
Right. Right.
I mean, why would you go to Housing Central Conference to talk about housing when you could talk about Hotel Pacifico? So while you were gone, Premier Eby did announce a new cabinet.
Mm-hmm.
So we thought we maybe talk about that today.
I'm keen to talk about that. I did see, I read it, but I haven't had any. I'm keen to pick your brains on this one. Yeah.
Well, just to set it up here, we have a clipping of the week. So, not particularly charitable clipping of the week from Vaughn Palmer, the dean of the press gallery, the curmudgeonly dean of the press gallery. But basically, Vaughn is saying that despite spending billions of dollars and launching myriad programs and holding uncounted news conferences and never wavering in promising results, when the election rolled around, the results told another story. The New Democrats came within one seat of being reduced to minority government. Surprising that it took the premier an entire month to put together an agenda that is identical to the first, and surprising too that he won't be ready to release mandate letters for the new cabinet until the new year. In the first Eby government, power was so centralized in the premier's office that ministers were at times reduced to functionaries. More than a few New Democrats are hoping that Eby will delegate responsibility to his ministers, as did his predecessor, John Horgan. Otherwise, the second Eby government will be driven by the same David knows best rule as the first. Ooh,
I know.
ouch.
Yeah. There are three
Juan-
things in
Juan's a
there.
little grumpy there.
Well,
Mhm.
that's on brand. But there are three
That's
things
true.
in
Good
there.
point.
Yeah, there are three things in there I think are worth pulling apart. One is just the question of the sort of agenda of the government not changing, right? Like Vaughn picking on saying, why would they come back with the same agenda? I think two, the mandate letters we should come to. And then three, the kind of how centralized is decision making, David knows best approach of the government. Can we start in that last one? Let's say, I think it is fact. Can we call it fact? It's generally known that this was a more centralized, under the Eby government, it has been a more, David Eby as the leader has taken a really centralized approach to leadership. Are there any signs that that's going to change that either of you have seen?
Not yet. But I think if I could just summarize the year briefly, sort of put it in a larger context, I would say it has been a tough year for the David Eby government. It was a difficult session with legislative targets that he hoped to achieve that he wasn't able to, a summer and then a difficult campaign. And it's been frankly a rough transition partway through. He changed his chief of staff. Matt Smith left, and Jim Rutkowski was hired on an interim basis. So there's clearly a lot of turmoil there, and now the mandate letter thing. So it's been a tough year. culminating in the death of John Horgan last week, which led to the kinds of comparisons that you're seeing in the unfavorable ones from Vaughan, and that's his, as you say, his brand, but also he's citing a lot of proof points. And I think the difficulty for Premier Eby is to say, well, how am I going to make that change and be true to myself as well? He was I think it was important for him, and I think correctly, he had to raise his profile by doing a lot of those announcements. But there was a point at which maybe he needed to change the approach, and we'll see how he adjusts now with the new group. I think it's going to be a little while before we can draw that conclusion, though.
Yeah, I'd say that's one of the hardest shifts to make is to go from one of those people who brings more on. And he's such a doer. I'm sure he comes about it naturally. But decentralizing and decentralizing power is very difficult. And it's not just difficult because of the leader, because you have a bunch of cabinet members who are just used to that. The system itself the elastic band's gonna go back to that pretty quickly.
Mhm.
I mean, the mandators, can I just say, like this is an itch I have to scratch because I come from a province where Doug Ford went into the 2022 election, I think, having not published, like saying the mandate letters of his ministers should be private. And they went into the 2022 election and won a majority, having like never shared them. So like, I'm not setting my hair on fire about mandate letters in January.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they're relatively new thing too. I mean, Gordon Campbell brought them in 2001. And before 2001, there wasn't even public mandate letters. And I think they were meant to be transparent and kind of like, here's the direction I'm giving the ministers, holding those ministers accountable, but also showing the public that, not that the public pays much attention to it. If there's one victim of these mandate letter delays, it's the government relations professionals who cannot report on the mandate letters to their clients. That is let's all shed a tear here for the government relations professionals that are 2 pages short of a full memo because of the lack of these mandate letters. But they'll have a happy January.
Sure. I think Vaughan makes a point too about the ministers themselves, like as they're getting briefed up on their files, like having more clarity on what their priorities are are helpful. But I'm like, yeah, there'll be conversations for sure that will give them a sense of where they're going. It's not the letter itself that's gonna,
Well, I don't
make
think
or break
people
that.
lie awake at night in the general electorate even knowing they exist, but they're critical for the public service. And the challenge for the premier is, why are they late? And he has made it clear, and we talked to Don Wright about this earlier in the show, that he's in discussions with Sonia Furstenau, who, by the way, did not get elected. In fact, she was seriously defeated when she tried to take out someone who was an NDP minister. So if I'm a cabinet minister in the EB team, I'm waiting to hear what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm probably curious about what Sonia Furstenau thinks I should be doing and whether that's going to have a big impact. And I think it's why they're late, not so much that they're late, that is interesting here.
So Kate, while you were gone, the Canadian Professional Football League had their Grey Cup here in Vancouver.
I saw this actually. Yeah.
And David
Eby
appeared to attend with Sonia Furstenau.
Yes.
And I thought, both of them don't strike me as big Canadian football fans. I might be wrong on that. So was this a reprise of the Horgan Weaver rugby game that Eby and Furstenau awkwardly were at a Canadian Football League game? I don't know. Do we attach the same significance as the rugby game, Geoff, or is this?
Well, it was impossible not to try to draw the line, and yet the circumstances are so different. So it's little bits like that where people go, oh, this must be on purpose. And as we know, many things that are overread in politics are by accident, good or bad. But that clearly was deliberate. And I've worked with Sonia First. I have a lot of time for her, but I didn't know she was a football fan. And
maybe
people who know me know I'm not either. I didn't realize it was Grey Cup weekend until Saturday. But,
all right, as also not a football fan, if someone offered me tickets to the Grey Cup, I'd totally go though. Like that's an important sporting event, right? Like they're not rolling up to some regular season game with unknowns. It's a good event.
Hang out with Wab Canoe and the Lieutenant Governor.
Sure. It's like us all watching the Olympics, right? We all tune into breakdancing suddenly, and it's not as though we're big fans of breakdancing. It's just, well, their stakes are high. So I'll it's not impossible to me. It's not such a stretch. Awkward, sure. That has to do more with the personalities in the sports venue, right? Can we stay on this with just the Vaughan's point, which is interesting about change, like how similar the agenda is between last time and this time? Because I'm wondering if we heard from the electorate any kind of clear, like, it wasn't so much you're focused on the wrong things. I would read it as, I read it more as you're not doing the right things to fix the things we care about. But is there some reordering that we could see out of the election that they something that they didn't include in their new list of priorities that's missing?
Well, I think there was a letter of general instruction to the ministers. They all got the same letter, what the priorities were. Healthcare, help me out here, Geoff.
Community safety.
Healthcare, community safety, the economy.
Yeah.
And
affordability.
I think there is
Stuff
a
that you and
dawning.
I talk about around the kitchen table.
Yeah, there is a dawning, I think, within the government that the economy is a
More,
big
yeah.
looming issue, and I'm hopeful that that will be a bigger part of their narrative and actual work of government going forward. And I think part of those cabinet picks may reflect that. And some of the notable things that caught my attention, I think, and Geoff, I think you share the same view. I think Adrian Dick's going to energy, which will include climate policy, is a significant move. I mean, no one has to. Everyone will understand that the energy file is getting a very involved minister who will thoroughly understand his brief.
Yeah, he was the energy critic in opposition for a while.
Right. And even going back to when he staffed Glenn Clark, he had his mitts all over BC Hydro even back in the 1990s. So I think what the energy sector is going to get with Adrian Dix is a very engaged minister who is going to push the sector, but also I think hear the sector. I think, as Geoff, I think you've described him as a data guy. There's a lot of facts and figures to contend with when it comes to economics, climate, exports, economic growth, all those things. So, I think that's a significant move. I think it's a deliberate. I interpret it as a deliberate move. I don't think they're just parking Adrian in energy. I think they're putting him there purposefully. So I'm interested to see how that's going to play out.
I think the cabinet picks are solid, but if you look into it a little deeper, Kate, you see, as Mike says, the energy file, but also mines split away because the mining sector is booming for critical minerals, and there's a lot of prospects there. So Jagrup Brar, who's waited a long time to get to the cabinet table, has got a very critical economic portfolio. On the social side, though, and there are many reasons why a mental health and addictions ministry was a good idea, and many reasons why it wasn't going to be successful. We could debate those. But it's gone, and it's in health. And now there's a minister of state and a solicitor general who are police officers, former police officers. So there's been a big shift in emphasis on the drug front to public safety and away from harm reduction. And I think that's going to be a difficult line to walk as well. There's been a few other changes too. Like I think it's interesting to see Jennifer Whiteside, who is a very strong minister in my view. She did education, she did mental health and addiction. Now she's got labor. It's an important portfolio for the government, but not one where we anticipate a lot of action because a lot of reform has already happened there. But it's notable to me because the presence of labor people in the government is lower than it's been for many years, with the retirement of people like George Heyman and Harry Baines. But on the other hand, Janet Rutledge is the whip. She was a longtime trade union activist, and she's going to have to make sure that everybody's there in their seats when the vote happens.
We touched on it with Don Wright, but the new Ministry of Housing and Municipal Affairs is interesting because, first of all, is what's in a name. I believe in the old days, for a time, it was municipal affairs and housing.
Correct.
And so this is housing first, municipal affairs second. Bit of a signal there. And with Ravi, who had some Ravi Kahlon, who had some skirmishes with Mike Hurley and Burnaby and Eric Woodward and Langley and some others about interfering with municipal jurisdiction in the name of housing supply. Here he is as the minister. Now, as Don and you noted, Geoff, some of that local government relationship's been taken to the premier's office.
Yeah.
With a minister
very
of
interesting
state
and not clear
reporting
why.
to the premier.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a two-headed beast.
I think on some of the issues that we see there, And I would point to the opioid issue is both a health issue, a public safety issue, and soon going to be an AG issue because of the introduction of some kind of involuntary care changes in legislation, which will undoubtedly be challenged. Likewise, on housing, I think you will need cross-ministry collaboration to get a bunch of that done because nobody's going to invest in housing if they're going to lose money. And the government committed to do a big government-led program through Build BC that would use public land and partner with First Nations and so on, and even subsidize mortgages. Those are very complex projects. Are they the responsibility of Ravi Kahlon? I guess so, but that's a very, very big program to stand up, especially in the context of the budget right now.
And Ravi's given up his government House Leader role, and that's gone back to Mike Farnworth, which, I think is
Makes
probably a
sense.
sensible move given Farney's experience in the last minority parliament. So
We shouldn't pass over Brenda Bailey, I think.
Oh, yeah, of course, yeah.
Yeah.
Going to finance, yeah.
The government, I agree with Don.
Well, the only prediction we got right, by the way.
No, didn't you also
Well-
predict Ravi? Oh, no.
No.
No. Okay, that's the only one. Okay, good job.
We did give
Well,
a
this is
prediction right.
to go back to
Yeah.
your first question, though, Kate. The ability of Brenda Bailey to make decisions and deliver government priorities in the context of trying to achieve that goal that the premier set of reducing the deficit after the coming one. It sounds like he's kicking it down the road. He's not. That will be real-time, very difficult decisions in the next 60 to 90 days that she has to make while trying to repair the relationship with the business community, which I think she's in a good position to do given her background. But it's a huge workload.
Can we play a game here? It's called Count the Vancouver Cabinet, number of cabinet ministers.
Mhm.
Okay.
Spencer Senator Herbert,
Mhm.
Brenda Bailey, Terry Young, Adrian Dix, Nikki Sharma, George Chow, David Eby. Do you have any others?
No.
Oh,
Those-
Christine Boyle.
Christine
Right.
Boyle.
It's eight.
But not the member for Langara, who's
Not
a
Langara,
NDP.
not Mabel Elmore, and not
Right.
Joan Phillip.
Right.
So that's 8 out of 11 made into cabinet. Rewarding Vancouver, one could say, for its full-throated support of the NDP in this election. But that's by far a record number. I mean, there might have been as many as 6 at one point, maybe, but that's a lot of ministers from Vancouver. Just noting that. Just
Yep.
And also a manifestation, though, of likely, how many they lost in the burbs, right? Like their experienced cabinet members were over-indexed within Vancouver.
Well, they're 8 of 11 from Vancouver. Obviously, they only elected 4 in the interior and 2 made it into cabinet. So they definitely, the voters gave them what they gave them, and there'll be a regional disparity in cabinet as a result.
Can we talk
There
about
were
the
some-
size of it for a second?
Yeah, sure.
Because, sorry, and I haven't got the numbers in front of me, but it's like all 47 basically between.
Yeah.
So it's 41 total.
All
yeah.
47 NDP
Have
MLAs
something.
are in cabinet. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, they're not in
Pretty
cabinet.
much.
Well,
Parliamentary
not in
Give or take.
cabinet.
secretaries.
41 in cabinet, right? Or
Give or
you
take.
have
No.
yeah.
Well, not 40.
Okay, wait,
27
let-
in cabinet.
27 in
27 in
cabinet.
cabinet.
Plus, what is it? Like 14 parliamentary secretaries
Yeah.
and then junior ministers of state.
Everyone gets extra money. Everyone gets extra money.
Well, but I mean, but hold on. Like, let's just also say small. Like they
As is
barely got
usually
a
the
majority.
case.
You're
Most usually get extra money, but now it's everybody gets extra.
Okay.
Well,
And
I think it's a way they get it. They're parliamentary secretaries as opposed to chairing a committee or something like that. And so a parliamentary secretary is sort of staring into the window of cabinet with their nose pressed against the glass, but they don't have any bureaucracy or
yes.
anything like that. And
Yeah.
it
Whereas
sounds
ministers of state
grand.
get into the cabinet room and they're just told to be quiet.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Sorry about that, ministers of state. We love you. But well,
Right.
I'll speak
Here's
for
an honest
myself. I'll
reckoning,
speak
yeah.
for myself. I don't know how Mike feels.
You may remove
But-
the
but I have
duct
a
tape
hunch.
after
No,
the
that was
cabinet meeting.
unanimous. Yeah. Yeah, that is a fair assessment. Okay.
I will mention. Well, it's a big cabinet. Yeah, I mean,
It's a big cabinet.
As a
There's a lot
percentage
to
of
do.
as a percentage of I mean, you could have a small cabinet with a lot to do as well, frankly, but
Yeah.
it's
I mean-
27 or 28 out of 47 is a big percentage, and I don't like it because I think it's I don't think it's a good caucus dynamic when you have
Yeah.
more than half your caucus sitting in cabinet. So the the ones who aren't in cabinet are just that much more on the
It's early.
outside.
Yeah.
I think it's healthier when a minority of your members are in cabinet and then a majority are not in
They're
cabinet.
ambitious, hopeful.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
just also they can be kept busy, and they should be a check on cabinet. Caucus is an important check on cabinet. But when more than half the MLAs are in cabinet, they're thinking like a cabinet minister, not a caucus member, frankly. So in my experience, caucus has been a really important safety valve on stupid decisions happening in cabinet and can sometimes prevent them from happening. And so I wonder whether that level of candor is going to be there with governments going off track on some stuff. Maybe, maybe not, but I think it's weighted more in favor of the government versus the caucus. And there's a very important distinction there, even though.
And I think they're very disempowered when they're such a small group relative to when you're a small group excluded from the table, you just don't have the same clout. Yeah.
Yeah.
I may be wrong on this. I think I'm not, but I'll certainly be quickly corrected if I am. So we'll update listeners if that happens. But it's the protocol in the NDP caucus that an incoming administration, which this one is, gives the premier the prerogative to basically appoint the first chair of caucus. After that, it's elected. So Stephanie Higginson is the chair of caucus. She's a newly elected MLA for the, I forget the whole name, but
my
it ends
favorite
with
riding.
Ladysmith. Yeah.
Lazy Oceanside.
She was a kind of somewhat of a giant killer because Adam Walker held that seat for the NDP and was thrown out of caucus and ran again. Probably he contributed to her victory. But so Stephanie Higginson is the chair. And to Mike's point, I think as this new caucus settles in, it's a very different group, a different makeup with different responsibilities. We'll see how they want to exercise their authority, which is real in terms of the government agenda. But it's a check, not a proactive role usually. And I think the government's going to have some quick cabinet retreats to figure a few things out, and some caucus retreats, and then right into the throes of the budget process. And the irony of this timing of this election too is that John Horgan wanted fall dates because he thought it would take the budget tensions out of the old style thing where you'd have a budget, then immediately call an election to see if you could win a mandate on it. It has now gone the other way, so that they're thrown straight into the deep end in terms of budget development with a new caucus.
I thought it had more to do with the BC Liberals winning 4 straight elections in May, but that's just silly old me.
No, he had a deep-seated policy reason, Mike.
Did he?
It's a very cynical judgment you've made there.
And university sits in October too. Yeah. So the Jim Rakowski announced our appointment, and the only thing I don't like about it is that it was deemed as a temporary move. I think that's a good appointment. And Jim's got a ton of experience as chief of staff to Carol James, but he also spent time as principal secretary to Rachel Notley. I think he's had a lot of experience dealing on a lot of economic issues in various roles.
He was a deputy and head of government communications, so he was already there. Yeah.
So I think the premier's got an experienced hand. I don't know how closely they've worked together in the past, and so maybe it's partly just trying out the relationship. But certainly with Jim, he's got someone who's been around the block. So that's probably a good thing.
Yeah, I agree with all that.
Good sign. Yeah.
I probably just gave him the kiss of death. Those things about him. But Don Bain, who had been a longtime deputy chief of staff, he is transitioned out of the premier's office now, I understand. So there's a bit of in and out going on.
Yeah, there's a couple of positions. Don was one. Leah Brewer, another senior person in there, has moved out. So we'll see what happens in those jobs or what the structure turns out to be down the road. I have no idea.
So we now wait for the all-important conservative critic announcements. Probably even more exciting than the actual cabinet will be. Who will be the critics? So we'll have to wait with bated breath. Maybe we'll know by next week. But I wonder who will be the finance critic to take on Brenda Bailey, et cetera, et cetera. I'll be interested to see where Gavin Dew lands. He seems to be in the middle of a lot of media coverage, and they certainly had some spicy takes on the cabinet shuffle and cabinet announcements. Gavin called the lack of letters of instruction embarrassing Peter Millibar called it a 100-day inaction plan. Oh boy, they're really getting
That
the
was
lines down
solid.
here.
They were really like throwing out there. This
They
is
say
them
that
like the
Gavin,
peacocks are strutting, showing
I
their
think
moves.
I think Gavin said that with every NDP MLA getting extra pay, every NDP MLA gets a participation ribbon, and the
Yeah,
taxpayers
that was
get
good.
hosed.
That is solid.
So anyway,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
so the Conservatives are in fighting form already, but
Yeah.
we'll see. It'd be interesting to see who they see as their
Mhm.
maybe future stars lined up against hot button issues that they are going to want to pursue, like crime and the economy and so forth.
It'd be amazing if Eleanor Sturko isn't the critic for public safety and
Right.
Solicitor General,
Yeah, well, she'll be somewhere.
the battle of the Surrey MLAs. Yeah.
I also noticed that Pierre Poilievre, quote unquote, endorsed John Rustad recently. He was out talking about his admiration they did a photo together, and his admiration for John's positions on X the tax. I'm thinking, like, what month is it, anyways? Is
Mhm. Can we call it an endorsement at this stage?
is it before October 19th right now? No, I don't
Yeah.
recall him, dipping his toes into the BC election
I
water.
don't
So,
think you can endorse someone post facto, but
well, that's exactly what he did. So,
cool. Yeah.
and then I'm just going to raise one more thing here in Strategy Suite. This is totally pivot to a different topic here, but there's a lot of people jumping on Blue Sky, the alternative to Twitter or X. And I took a little, I have a lot of, let's call them not conservative friends who are all jumping over to Blue Sky. And it is interesting, like Justin McElroy, the on leave CBC reporter, already has 10,000 followers on Blue Sky, which I thought was more than I would have expected. He has 82,000 on X, so still ways to go. Richard Zussman has 5,300 followers on Blue Sky, 77,000 on X. So it's still a long way behind it, but I was surprised how fast they're growing those networks. And
Yeah.
my concern, though, is that all the center lefties are going to be over in Blue Sky, all the conservative types are going to be over
Stan
X, and there's just two separate echo chambers, and that's kind of going to suck, I think.
Mhm.
Just gonna say it's not apples to apples here, it's apples to oranges when you look at them, because if you've been on X for a long time, a big section of that following is going to be, people who don't use anymore, or like it's there, if you look at like it's going to be much more active, the presence on Blue Sky, just because it's so new. Like I'm actually, the Justin McElroy numbers are impressive, and I bet you he's getting similar engagement with that fraction compared to the 82K on X. But you're right, like your point is bang on, Mike, that like these are these sort of micro chat fora are really key to political discourse in particular. And the problem with this is it's shaping up to really have two discussions happening in parallel.
There's Instagram and TikTok too, which are obviously big followings in a different way. But
Different way.
it doesn't seem
Yeah.
like Threads is really
Taking off.
got any traction. I don't think anybody really got that excited about Threads
Yeah.
as an alternative to Twitter. It's maybe too much like Twitter in a way, in terms of big tech, evil empire type of vibes.
Yeah, it wasn't the right alternative. Yeah.
Even though retrospectively how social media functioned during the last campaign, because I do believe a lot of it was below the surface, but we don't have the data to find out. So
yeah, it's interesting.
Well, given the hoarseness of Kate's voice, I think we better head to the minibar.
Let's raise a glass or take a shot. Time to raid the minibar.
I'm going to raise a toast. I know that right away. I was on Saturday. I went to Harry Bain's retirement party, which was a great event with all kinds of people from his riding and constituency and from broader politics there, including Wally Opal and other folks. But Harry's story, which I want to summarize really, really briefly, is a great one because he emigrated from India as a young man, came here and wound up working first in a foundry in Ontario, sponsored by some family members, then came back here, went into work at the Eburn sawmill at a time in the 50s when they were still, or was it 60s? In the 60s, when there was still enough active racism in the plant that people were told they couldn't warm up their roadies on the heating in the in the lunchroom. Confrontation over that led him into union leadership, and from that to senior roles in the IWA, elected, and then on to politics, where he was elected many times and served as he's the longest serving cabinet minister probably ever in the Labor portfolio, because he did 7 straight years there. So it was a great evening, and really interesting to hear the stories of Harry's life and his contributions, and see all the people who cherished his contribution. And I wish him all the best, and so did all of they. So here's to Harry Baines.
All right.
Here.
I got a string of them now because you reminded me of one here. I will raise a glass to Shirley Bond. I wasn't able to make it up to her tribute in Prince George, but there was a well-attended tribute a week or two ago to honor her career as one of the longest continuously serving cabinet ministers in BC history. Not as long as W.A.C. Bennett, but she might have been second or third place on that list, along with Rich Coleman, who both served 16 straight years in the BC Liberal government from pillar to post. So good for you, Shirley. I'm sure she's got a lot of energy left to continue service of some kind up in Prince George. I also want to acknowledge my friend Nilo Edwards, who's the head of the First Nations Major Project Coalition. First met Nilo when he was a teenager, a gangly kid from Sointula, who somehow ended up in BC Liberal and federal Conservative politics. Only kid ever from Sointula ever pulled that stunt. But Nilo was recognized in the Time 100 list for climate, and with regard to his role with the First Nations Major Project Coalition, the innovation taking place with First Nations financing. So good for Nilo. And finally, I want to acknowledge the work of family doctors, and I'm acknowledging this because my family doctor just retired, Dr. Wayne Smith, who is told me that he listens to Hotel Pacifico, but it is tough to get a family doctor, and I've gone through all the here, sign up on this government tool to go find a doctor. So I found one on my own, but I learned it is a daunting task to find a doctor, and thank all those family docs out there that are doing their thing. There you go.
Yeah, I can validate that. We had to do that. It's hard to find them in Ontario. We moved there in 2008, and then we moved here in 2019. It was way harder here. Really hard. It took us 2 years to find a family doc for us, but agree with that. I'm going to pick up on something Don Wright actually said, and I'm going to raise my glass to the new Minister of Education and Childcare. I'm glad to see these bundled together, Lisa Bear. But Don is bang on something that's going to sound a bit policy wonkish, but I'm going to say it's going to be politics 4 years from now, and that is capital expansion with the education system. So that model we have here, it does not work. And I'm going to say, like, I could do an essay on this. Sorry, this is one of my nerdier spaces, but I'll try and keep it tight and just say what happens in other jurisdictions actually is the board has to apply to us with a specific project with everything they have included in it, and then it's all costed according to that. One of the important steps that happens in Ontario right now is actually that the assumption in the de facto is that the school will include a childcare, and that makes a ton of sense in a place like Surrey. What has to happen is the school board has to actually talk to the municipality and confirm that they've had that conversation to confirm that there's need. If there isn't, they can sort of opt out, and you cannot build a childcare. But anyway, there's important capital efficiencies here. There's good politics in this, and this is the kind of stuff you've got to map out a 4-year roadway so that in how you approach capital expansion within the education system, 4 years from now, the burbs in Vancouver are feeling love. So my glass is raised to you. Yeah.
Are you saying that Minister of State might be able to talk after all?
Yes. Yes.
Well, that's a great idea. Here.
There we go. All right.
Unleash the Ministers of State.
Okay. Should I walk us out now, Mike? Like, can
I think we've probably filibustered this long enough.
All right. All right. So I'm so glad to be back. It's good to see you both. That's another episode of Hotel Pacifico. I want to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS. We want to thank Fortis BC and Airbnb. We will see you next week, guests. BC, you can never leave.
Check out time at Hotel Pacifico. We hope you enjoyed your stay.